So as usual, I am late to the game in discovering the latest technologies and stuff with what you can do on the computer in terms of recording, and more specifically to me, recording guitars. The last 3 to 6 months, I have discovered impulse responses. So at first, I wasn't really much of a believer. I didn't think that they were going to be anywhere near as good as actual microphones could be in terms of recording a sound, but I've been trying them recently, and they have become my go-to sort of in-studio application in terms of recording. I've tried different microphones. I've tried an Audix i5, an SM57, an AKG C3000, the Rode NT1 here, and the Audix F9. I've done impulse responses with all of these microphones, and I've had phenomenal results. I upload my IRs into a free plugin that I found online called IR. It's nothing special, but it gets the job done. You can run 2 IRs at the same time and do your high pass filter, low pass filter to kind of clean it up a little bit. But other than that, don't really need anything special. And this video is basically just going to be me running through briefly how I recorded my IRs, and just to give you an idea of, if you were maybe to do your own, how to do it and what kind of results that you can expect. So I did a little bit of research. I tried a few different things, and this is the process that ultimately works best for me, is this. What I did was bring in a little bit of white noise into, I use Cubase Elements 11 currently, and brought some white noise in. I trimmed it down to about 1 sample length. If you're looking at your waveform, it's going to be basically your first major positive arch, if you will, of your waveform. If you want, you can do a little bit further. I don't really think it makes that much of a difference, because you're going to end up trimming your end product anyways. What I did was take that white noise click, if you will, and ran it through the output of my interface here. I use a Presonus Studio 24C, just a little 2-channel interface, nothing special. The output from there to my amplifier, I go from there to the Hughes & Kettner Power Amp in, and then I go from there to my speaker cabinet. I put the microphones in front of the speaker, and then I run the microphones back into the input of my interface, and I make a loop. That way, when I hit record, it plays the audio and records it from the speaker at the same time. I compromised a little bit, and I did not use an actual straight power amp. I had to do this a certain way. I had to use my amplifier. I didn't have anything else available at the time, so going into my power amp here on my Hughes & Kettner works just fine for me. It adds a little bit of color because you have to run it through the power tube section, or you get a little bit of the coloring of the power tubes, which honestly, in my opinion, I don't really care, because it still sounds good and it still works for me. But if you want an actual legit exact representation of your speaker cabinet and just the microphones, then you're going to want to use a power amp, just a straight power amp that doesn't offer any coloring. So once I had those audio samples recorded into Cubase, I then proceeded to trim them down. Basically, I took the recorded audio sample of the white noise click, and I shortened it down to that 1 sample length. So if the first initial point at where you're getting audio from that white noise click, that first positive little arch, and then the first negative arch, I kept, and that was my sample. A lot of people will just take that positive arch and do it that way, but I kind of like the sound of it a little bit better if I took the first positive and negative. If you go any longer than that, it starts to sort of change the characteristic of it, and I liked it better with using the 2 waveforms instead of just the 1, or not trimming it at all, because I've actually imported ones that I found online for free, and they are completely untrimmed, and they honestly don't sound very good. What helped them sound good was me bringing them into Cubase, trimming them the way that I no, I think you're supposed to, re-exporting them and then throwing them into my NAD IR plugin, and they seem to work fine at that point. One of the next things that's pretty important is making sure that once you have all those samples trimmed, that you line them all up and export them exactly the same length, the same starting point with the beginning of the waveforms. Because if you don't, what I found is that I started dealing with phase issues. The timing of the IR when it starts and when it stops does make a difference, and it's really interesting. I didn't know that it worked this way, but I found that if I took IRs that somebody else recorded and brought them in and not only trimmed them but lined them up to my own as well, they all seemed to work fine no matter what combination I decided to use. One other thing that I thought of where I started to run into trouble with miking my speaker cabinet was microphone placement. You can put that microphone anywhere you want on that speaker at any angle, and the IR, the sample rather, is going to pick it up the way it's supposed to. It's not going to affect it. You're going to get the character of the position that you have the microphone at. The only thing that I found was really, really not helpful was if you were to put the microphone too close to the grill or too close to the speaker. The first time I did it, and I should have stuck with it, I didn't know this would make a huge difference. I went about my general rule of thumb is a 2-finger length from the edge of the microphone, or where I think the diaphragm is, to the speaker grill or the cabinet grill, and having it not too close is going to help give your IR more of a character. What I found, because I've done this at least three times with the same set of microphones in all the same positions, and what I found was if I had the microphone up against the grill, it didn't matter where on the speaker I put it, it still sounded like a mushy, muddy, harsh mess. It sounded the same, exactly the same on the center of the speaker as it did off to the edge of the speaker. I don't know why, I can't explain it, but that was my result. So if you're recording your own IRs at home, make sure you keep that in mind. Don't put your microphones too close, because you're just going to get a really, really aggressive sounding impulse response. That's cool if you do it with a couple of them, but just so you know, you're not going to get much of a character difference the more you move the microphone around the speaker. All right, so here is my session in Cubase. What I've done is I made my initial track right here, labeled it white noise. I just brought in a little bit of white noise, literally just dropped it into this area, cut it down to about this long. So as long as you take one positive arch, whatever you want to call it, of a waveform here, and then maybe a little bit on the bottom, it doesn't really matter, because you're going to be trimming what you record over here anyways. And as you can see, these are the microphones. This is where I placed that particular microphone. And I have trimmed these down and lined them up for the most part. And this is what they look like here. I took the very first initial positive, and then I added one negative and then cut it. And then when I bounced the track down, just to make sure that the plugin, the NAD IR, was going to recognize it, I made it at least a half a second long. Because if I made it any shorter than that, then NAD IR wouldn't even read it. You could upload it and you could play your guitar through it, and I had absolutely no sound whatsoever coming out of it. So in some of my IRs, I've actually combined many of them. Some of them I took every i5 microphone and bounced them all down into one IR. And what you're left with is basically this sound. Hopefully you can hear it. It's basically just a really quick snap. So maybe if I add a few more, it'll be louder. That's about it. All you have to do is bounce that down into a half a second or longer impulse response with it trimmed up like that. You are good to go. and then you can do any combination. If you want to add microphones together to make one impulse response, you can do that. As you can see, I've done quite a few. They're all lined up together. These are a bunch of free ones I found online that I had to trim up. Otherwise, you get all this extra noise over here, and it doesn't sound very good. You get a lot of extra of the room. If the audio starts over here and another one starts over here, if you want to combine them both together, you get phase issues because they're not on time. You can run into a whole bunch of stuff, but the general rule of thumb is you really should keep them trimmed up and lined up, and you should be able to avoid most problems. All right, so I have NAD IR loaded right here. And as you can see, I have all my impulse responses loaded up right here. I am going to start with the I5 dead center in the cone. I'm probably just going to run through a few of these, and then I'll show you just a couple of combinations, and then I will move on to the sound clips of what it sounds like in a mix. So here is the I5 over just the cone, the very center of the speaker on the cone. Alright, so it's very bright, it's very crunchy, just as we would expect from putting a microphone over the center of the speaker. And if we moved it outside on the cone's edge, it would sound more like this. And then I have a couple of positions in the middle of the speaker, so just moving it to the middle, it would sound more like this. Alright, and then the middle of the speaker with the mic pointed towards the cone. And the I5 speaker edge. As you can see, it kind of goes flatter, thicker sounding as you move out towards the edge of the speaker. If I want to test out the SM57 in the middle of the speaker, that's going to sound a little bit more like this, so you can hear just the different characters of the different microphones. Alright, so that to me definitely sounds like an SM57. It's got some upper mid bite to it. It's a little bit crunchier. If you have any experience with an SM57, if you start rolling through these, you're going to notice really quick that it really does sound like the SM57 microphone, which is really cool. And if I wanted to blend some of these together, like if I wanted to take the I5 cone edge for some brightness and mix it with the SM57, maybe in the middle, set this right in the dead center so I get a perfect blend of both, it would sound like this. Sounds pretty good. And if you want to listen to what it sounds like when I move from balancing the I5 cone edge and then slowly moving it over to the SM57 middle, you'll kind of hear. Well, actually, I'm gonna use the SM57 cone, or excuse me, the speaker edge, go from bright to dark, and I'll show you how the blend can kind of You can just find a really good blend of just about anything in here. So this is completely the i5 Cone Edge. So you can kind of hear as I go from the i5 to the SM57, you can pretty much blend it anywhere you want to. It's pretty neat.